Colorado Territory. Spring of 1873. The wind at the Gunnison station carried the chill of melting snow and the silence of disappointment. Della Norwood stood alone on the edge of the platform, holding tight to the handle of her carpetbag. Her cheeks burned from more than the morning cold. Behind her, the group of women traveling west under the promise of marriage contracts had already boarded the train. All but her. The man who had sent for her, a dry goods merchant from Salt Lake City, had taken one look at her when she stepped off the earlier coach and shook his head like she was a mule with a bad leg. "She's too fat," he had muttered to the train agent, not even bothering to say it to her face. "I paid for a strong wife, not someone who'll eat me out of house and home." Then he was gone. The train hissed and groaned as it pulled away, wheels screeching against the rails. Della did not wave. She just stood there, lips pressed together, her spine straight even though it hurt to hold it that way. Her corset dug into her ribs, but she refused to cry. She had left everything behind in Missouri, the little room she rented above the bakery, her job folding linens at the boarding house, and the handful of people who barely noticed she existed. She had sold her mother's ring to afford the travel, answering an ad in the back of a St. Louis paper that promised good Christian men looking for sturdy wives. Sturdy, she supposed, was not what he meant. A clatter of boots sounded behind her, not hurried, just steady, confident. "You waiting for someone?" a voice asked, low and calm. She turned, startled. The man was tall, wide-shouldered under a worn brown duster. His hat shaded his eyes, but she could see the creases at their corners. He had a strong jaw, dusty from travel, and a kind face that looked like it had weathered its share of storms. "No," she said, voice catching. "Not anymore." He looked at her a moment, then glanced down the empty stretch of tracks. "You were part of the mail order group," she nodded. He changed his mind. The cowboy studied her for a beat longer, then stepped closer, lifting his hat to fully look at her. His eyes were a deep hazel, warm like sunlit wood. "Well, then he is a damn fool," he said, quiet but firm. "Name's Isaiah Zeller." She blinked. "Della Norwood." Isaiah offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in it. His grip was warm, calloused, steady. "You got anyone here?" he asked. "No," she said. "No one." Isaiah tipped his head toward the edge of the platform. "Got a wagon just over there. I was only here to pick up a shipment of tack, but looks like I found something more important." She frowned. "You do not even know me." He smiled, not the kind that mocked, but something softer. "True, but I know what it feels like to be left behind." Della swallowed hard. Her throat ached from holding in all the things she had not said, not to the merchant, not to the other women, not even to herself. "I cannot just go with a stranger," she whispered. Isaiah nodded. "Then let me change that. I run cattle up near Blue Mesa, small spread, nothing fancy. But I live honest and I got room at my table. You can come rest a while, no expectations." She looked down at her boots. One had a threadbare lace she had not noticed before. "People will talk." "They already do," he said with a shrug. "Let them." The wind stirred her skirts. Her fingers tightened around the carpetbag. She had nowhere else to go, and something in his voice, that quiet steadiness, pulled at her chest. "All right," she said, barely louder than the wind. He helped her down from the platform and led her to a bugboard hitched to a chestnut mare. He stowed her bag in the back, then offered his hand to help her climb up. As they rode from the station, the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It felt easy, like a porch swing creaking in the dusk. They reached his land close to sundown. The house was modest, a low cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, but well kept. A dog barked once and then wagged its tail, circling Della's skirts when she stepped down. Isaiah opened the door for her. "Welcome home," he said. She froze, heart thudding. "Sorry," he said quickly. I just meant you can stay as long as you like. No pressure. Della stepped inside. The place smelled of pine, coffee, and something warm stew simmering on the hearth. She turned to him. You live alone, he nodded. Had a brother. He died in the war. Parents passed before that. She set her bag near the hearth. I lost mine too, my father when I was little, my mother 3 years back. He met her eyes. Then we understand each other. That night he gave her the bedroom and slept on a cot by the fire. She lay awake for a while, listening to the wind in the pine trees and the creak of the walls settling. She had never been called beautiful, not once, not even close. But when Isaiah looked at her, she did not feel like she had to shrink herself. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Isaiah showed her how to feed the chickens, how to patch fence rails, how to brush the mare. She cooked, swept, mended his shirts. They talked not much, but enough. About the land, the sky, the way the stars looked different out here. About loss. About starting over. One morning over coffee, he set his cup aside and looked at her for a long time. You know, he said, voice low, I have not brought a woman into this house since the war. Never saw a reason. But you feel like something I have been waiting for. Della's breath caught. I am not small, she said, ashamed of how small her voice sounded. You are real, Isaiah said. And you are mine now if you want to be. Tears filled her eyes. She had never been wanted like that, not even close. She reached across the table and took his hand. I want to be. The high valley thawed slowly, snow draining into dark earth, and the days stretched longer with each sunup. Della woke early now, roused not by habit, but by a quiet want to see the light come in through the small square window above the bed. She pressed her palms to the quilt and listened to the soft sounds of Isaiah outside, the grounding scrape of a shovel, the low murmur he used with the livestock. She dressed in silence and braided her hair with the comb he'd carved from juniper, the grain smooth and pale. He'd left it on the table 3 days back without a word, just beside her sewing basket. She hadn't asked him why. She didn't need to. When she stepped outside, the air was wet with the scent of damp pine bark and the promise of rain later. Isaiah stood near the stack of halved logs, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat darkening the collar of his undershirt. You sleep steady? He asked, brushing sawdust from his forearm. I did, she said, tucking a curl behind her ear. Dreamed about peaches. There was a tree full of them. He gave a quiet huff of breath, not quite a laugh. You ever had fresh ones off the branch, only canned, she said. Back in Missouri, we had a neighbor who'd make preserves with them come August. She wouldn't give me the recipe, but I learned it anyway by watching through her window. Isaiah set down the axe and leaned on the handle. There's a man west of here, past the ridge, grows them in a little orchard. Might be early for fruit, but the trees'll be blooming soon. Della studied him. You're talking like we might still be here come August. I am, he said, steady as the mountains behind him, unless you're set on somewhere else. She shook her head. I'm not. He nodded, and they left it at that. Later that morning they rode out along the creek bed to check the cattle. The mare took to Della's weight easily now, her steps sure. Isaiah rode ahead, one hand on the reins, the other resting on his thigh. The land opened wide around them, hills dusted with wild sage, the river flashing light like a silver ribbon. They passed a coyote skull bleached white in the sun, and a set of wagon ruts half swallowed by time. They came upon a downed section of fence where a heifer had slipped through and grazed on the fresh shoots. Isaiah dismounted and handed Della the line rope. Hold her steady, he said, crouching to inspect the rails. Della stepped close to the young cow, murmuring low and even. Her hands were firm and the animal stilled under her touch. Isaiah glanced over his shoulder. She listens to you. I was always good with animals, Della said. I just never had any that were mine. He stood and brushed off his palms. You do now. They rode back under a sky thickening with clouds, the light going soft and gray. Isaiah handed her a wrapped cloth from his saddlebag when they stopped to water the horses. Made this yesterday. It's not much. She unwrapped the cloth and found a folded square of sweet cornbread, still faintly warm from the sun. She took a bite and closed her eyes. You used molasses, she said, surprised. Only had 1 jar left, he said. Figured you were worth it. They didn't speak much as they rode home, but something inside her eased, like a knot she hadn't realized was pulling too tight had finally let go. That night, she sat beside the hearth, her fingers moving through embroidery thread. Isaiah was at the table, mending a saddle strap with a curved needle and thick wax thread. The fire cracked low, and the only other sound was the ticking of the mantel clock. He looked up once without raising his head. You think you'd ever want to stay on, not just for the season? Della set her embroidery down. What would staying mean? He laid the strap aside. Means I'd build a bigger room off the back. Means you'd help name the calves next spring. Means I'd stop sleeping out here. She didn't answer right away, just watched the flames curl along the log. I was told once that I take up too much space, she said finally. That I should be quieter, less. Isaiah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Whoever said that was afraid of what they didn't understand. She looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't handsome in the way books described. He had a crooked tooth on one side and a scar that disappeared into his hairline. But his eyes never shifted, never wandered. They stayed on her like she was something he meant to carry. I don't want to be less, she said. Good, he replied, because I want all of you. She crossed the room and sat beside him, her knee brushing his. His hand found hers without needing to search. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But her head came to rest against his shoulder, and his arm curved around her like it had always belonged there. Rain started up outside, soft and steady against the roof. And for the first time in years, Della didn't wonder where she would go next. By late May, the snow was gone from the pasture edges, and the river ran thick with mountain melt. Della had taken to working the garden plot behind the cabin, knees in the soil, sleeves rolled high. She moved with purpose now, not just filling time, but settling in. The rows she planted were straight, and when Isaiah passed by on his way to the barn, he paused, watching her long enough for her to feel it. You ever grow squash? She asked, brushing dirt from her hands. Only the kind that takes over the fence, he said. You planning to feed the whole valley? I like the way they vine, she replied. They don't ask permission. They just take the space they need. Isaiah tipped his hat back, considering that. Nothing wrong with needing space. She looked up from where she crouched. You ever share this land with someone before? Only my brother, he said. He was louder than me, laughed more, but he made the place feel full. She stood and dusted off her skirts. You miss him, he nodded. Every day, but I don't feel alone anymore. Della didn't answer. She didn't need to. That evening, she found Isaiah outside, oiling the hinges on the chicken coop. The sky behind him was streaked with pink and burnt orange, and the scent of pine resin hung in the air. She sat on the porch steps, apron still tied around her waist. Had a letter come through town, he said without looking up. Miller brought it with the salt and flour. For you, he nodded. From a cousin in Kansas. Says he's heading west with a wagon train, might stop through next month. Will he stay here? She asked. Not if I can help it, he said. He's the kind that drinks before noon and asks questions later. Della raised an eyebrow. Sounds like trouble. Isaiah chuckled. He usually is. She watched the chickens scratch at the grass. I never had kin write me, not even once. Isaiah set the oil can aside and walked toward her. He didn't sit, just stood near the porch, arms crossed loosely over his chest. You want to write someone? He asked. I can take it into town next trip. "There's no one to write to," she said, "but thank you." The wind picked up a little, tugging at the loose hair near her neck. Isaiah stepped up onto the porch and sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You think you'd ever want to marry again?" she asked, her voice nearly swallowed by the breeze. "I never did the first time," he said. "Thought maybe I'd missed my chance." Della looked at him. "You didn't." He turned his head slowly, meeting her eyes. "I know." She reached for his hand without thinking. His fingers closed around hers with a kind of certainty that made her chest ache. "I never wore a ring," she said. "He sent one, the merchant. But it didn't fit." Isaiah looked down at their joined hands. "Then I'll make sure yours does." She blinked but didn't look away. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I don't want a woman who shrinks herself to fit someone else's shape. I want you just as you are." Her breath shuddered, not from fear, but something deeper, a quiet release of the years she'd been told to be less, to wait, to settle. "I'll marry you," she said. Isaiah said nothing for a moment. Then he lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed a kiss to the inside of her wrist. She closed her eyes. That night, he laid a second quilt across her bed, careful not to wake her. And when dawn came, she found him already outside, hammering boards into what would become a new room on the back of the cabin. She brought him water and stood watching while he worked, her hand resting on the growing curve of her waistline. "You building it for me?" she asked. "For us," he said, driving another nail home. "We've got more to hold now than just ourselves." And she smiled because he was right. By early June, the new room stood framed and roofed, its walls still raw pine but solid underfoot. Della had chosen the corner where the morning sun reached first, and there she set a small wooden cradle Isaiah had traded for in town. He hadn't said much when he brought it home, only waited while she ran her hand along the smooth rail and nodded once without smiling. Some things didn't need words. She'd begun sewing in the afternoons, not for need, but to settle her hands. The child would come before the first snow, and though she'd never raised one, she moved through the preparations with quiet resolve. She stitched linen nightshirts, folded muslin squares, and boiled the kettle to soften cotton stuffing for a small pillow. When her back ached, she rested without apology. One evening, Isaiah returned late from the northern pasture, his boots caked in dried mud, hat rims stained with sweat. "Trouble?" Della asked, setting down her darning. "Cougar got into the herd," he said, stripping off his gloves. "Took one of the calves." She stood and poured water into the basin near the door. "You hurt?" He shook his head. "Just tired. It got off before I could get a clean shot." She brought him a tin cup of cider and waited as he washed the trail dust from his hands and face. His shoulders sagged as he drank, and he leaned back against the wall, eyes closed for a moment longer than usual. "You ever think about hiring someone?" she asked. He opened his eyes. "I manage." "I know, but maybe managing doesn't mean doing it alone." He set the cup down. "You think I can't carry it? I think you've been carrying it too long." He looked at her then, not guarded, just quiet. "There's a family east of the lake," she said. "I met the daughter at the mercantile last week. They've got 3 boys, strong backs. You could offer wages through harvest." Isaiah nodded slowly. "I'll ride out tomorrow." She reached for his hand, fingers lacing easily now. "It doesn't make you less, Isaiah." He let out a breath. "I know that better when you say it." Later, after the dishes had been cleared and the lamps trimmed, they sat on the porch steps. The sky was clear, and the stars hung low and sharp. Della leaned against his side, her head resting just below his shoulder. "I heard back from a woman in St. Louis," she said. "The one who taught me to raid." He glanced down. "She's still at the school, she is. Says she remembers me as the girl who always asked for the books with maps in them. You were looking for a way out. I think I was looking for a place that felt like mine." Isaiah was silent for a while. Then he said, "You think you've found it?" Della turned her head until her cheek pressed against his sleeve. "I don't think, I know." He didn't kiss her. He just pulled her closer, his hand covering hers where it rested on her lap. The next morning, Isaiah left early to speak to the family east of the lake. Della remained behind, tending to the hens and mending the coop's shade cloth. By midday, clouds gathered heavy over the west ridge, and thunder rolled distant but steady. When Isaiah returned, he brought news that the eldest son would arrive the following week to help with fencing and summer hay. He also brought a parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "From the general store," he said, handing it to her as she wiped her hands on her apron. "Said it had your name." She opened it at the table, unwrapping the cloth slowly. Inside was a folded quilt square stitched in blue and cream, the center embroidered with a single line in looping script, "For the home you made with your own hands." Della ran her thumb over the threads. "It's from her. She used to say no one comes to the frontier to wait, they come to build." Isaiah touched her shoulder, just a brush of his fingertips. "You built something here too." She turned to him, eyes full but steady. "So did you." That night, as the storm broke overhead and rain beat against the roof, they lay in the new room for the first time. The cradle sat empty between them, but not for long. Isaiah's arm draped over her waist, his breath slow behind her ear. "You remember what I told you at the station," he murmured. She nodded, not speaking. "I meant it then. I mean it more now." Outside, wind swept through the trees, but inside the cabin, everything held still. Safe, certain. Della's hand found his under the quilt. "I'm yours," she whispered back. "And you're mine." By midsummer, the high grass rippled gold in the pasture, and the air hung heavy with the scent of warmed resin and wild thyme. Isaiah had taken to rising early to finish the fence-line repairs before the sun cleared the ridge. Della, slower now with the weight of the child pressing low in her belly, spent her mornings near the porch shelling beans or sorting dried herbs into cloth packets. She moved with care, but not hesitation. The day the first hay cutting began, the hired boy, Illy, 17 and sharp-eyed, arrived with his father's mule and a borrowed rake. He worked hard and without complaint, and in the evenings he sat on the porch rail, quiet while Della read aloud from the one book Isaiah had kept from his brother's things, a collection of stories about rivers and far-flung places. Illy didn't speak much, but when Della paused, he would nod like he understood more than he let on. One afternoon, as Isaiah repaired the barn roof and Della rested in the shade with her feet in a basin of cool water, Illy approached with a folded note in his hand. "From my ma," he said. "She sent a pie, too, but I dropped it off with your husband." Della opened the note and read the spidery handwriting. "She wants to know if I'd help with her girl's wedding dress. Says her fingers can't take the fine stitching anymore." Illy shifted his weight. "She heard you were good with a needle, told her I seen your work." Della smiled. "Tell her I'll come next week. I've got some lace tucked away she might like." Illy nodded and turned to go. "Illy," she called after him, "you've done good work here. Your folks should be proud." He paused, half-turned. "I think they are. I'll be back early tomorrow." That evening, as the sun bled orange across the western slope, Isaiah came in with dust on his shoulders and a bruise rising along his forearm. "You all right?" Della asked, rising slowly from her chair. "Beam slipped," he said. "Caught it before it pinned me." She guided him to the wash basin and wet a cloth. "You need to stop climbing alone. I'm fine." "You don't have to be," she said, dabbing at the scrape. "That boy could have helped." Isaiah watched her hands. "I know, I forget sometimes that I don't have to do it all." She met his eyes. "You're not alone anymore." He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. "I know that best when you're near." Later they ate by lantern light. The pie crumbled between them on a tin plate. Isaiah reached across the table and rested his palm over hers. "I was thinking," he said, "after harvest, we could build a smokehouse. Trade some cured meat through the winter." "You've already got the salt," she said, "and I can work lard into biscuits better than I used to." He smiled at her, and the quiet between them filled with something easy, lasting. The baby arrived just after the first frost, on a still night when the wind paused and even the hens seemed to wait. Della labored with her jaw set and her shoulders loose, the way she'd seen animals do when they trusted the moment to carry them through. Isaiah stayed close, his hands steady, his voice low even when she gripped his wrist hard enough to leave marks. At dawn, she held their daughter in the crook of her arm, her breath warm against the soft round of the child's head. Isaiah knelt beside the bed, hand wrapped around hers. "She's strong," he said. "She'll have to be," Della whispered. He kissed her temple. "She's got you." "That's more than enough." They named her Marin after Isaiah's mother and wrapped her in the quilt Della had finished the week before, stitched in 4 colors, each chosen without reason but fitting together like they'd always belonged. That winter passed slow and close. The snow came heavy, and the woodpile shrank faster than expected, but Isaiah made 2 more trips into the timber and never once mentioned the ache in his shoulder. Della nursed the baby by the fire, her feet tucked beneath Isaiah's coat when the cold crept under the door. In the evenings, they sat together in the long hush, Marin asleep between them. Spring returned with a sudden thaw, the river breaking loose with a sound like distant thunder. The cattle calved early, and Ali returned with his younger brother to help mend the west fence. Della rode out once, Marin swaddled against her chest, to see the wildflowers pushing through last year's dust. "I used to think I'd never belong anywhere," she said, looking out over the land. "That I'd always be waiting for someone to say I didn't fit." Isaiah took the reins and looked at her. "No one says that now." "No," she said. "No one does." By the end of that summer, Isaiah had built a tool shed beside the barn and enclosed a stretch of the porch for winter drying. Della's garden bore more than they needed, and she traded jars of pickled beans and early apples to the preacher's wife in exchange for beeswax candles and carded wool. They hosted Eli's sister's wedding under the cottonwoods, the parson reading his lines with a crow cawing overhead and the bride's veil catching on a fence post. Isaiah carved a bench for the couple and carried it himself to their new cabin, nodding once when the groom offered thanks. That night, with the baby asleep and the fire low, Della curled against Isaiah's chest, her hand resting where his heart beat sure and steady. "You still think I was a fool for coming west?" she asked. "No," he said, his voice soft in her hair. "I think the West was waiting for you." They lay there in the quiet, the warmth between them older than words, stronger than the wind that once tried to carry her back. And when the night deepened and the stars blinked open above the roof, they held each other like a promise already kept.